Hello everyone, ladies and gentlemen, kids of all ages. My name is Abby, and welcome to episode 11 of Gregtech New Horizons. Last time, we rushed our way through progression and got ourselves to the moon and our first bits of titanium, starting the fourth tier of electricity, which is EV tier. This time, we're going to take our foot off the pedal and focus on some of the side projects that we now have access to with EV under our belt. The first big goal on my mind is to expand the clean room. Our current clean room is a 3x3 footprint. That's pretty small, and we're going to need a lot more stuff in our clean room pretty soon. So I was making all of the necessary materials to turn it into a 7x7 one. I also want to make the pie-release oven, and the big goal of this episode is to get AE2 set up. I later decide that I also want distillation towers to improve my oil processing. We're going to do that as well. I should mention that in between episodes, I got a lot of things done. Though none of it important to progression, most of it just making sure I had the resources to do this episode. One of the things that I did was I changed my titanium processing loop to have a vacuum freezer. So no longer does it just make the hot titanium ingots, it makes the full titanium. I also made more or less 6 stacks of the MV circuits. We're going to be using a lot of circuits in the future, and the MV circuits, that is to say the more advanced ones that we got access to, are pretty cheap to make, so might as well just make them in bulk. So I have approximately 250 of them at this point. Aside from that, let's talk clean room. I mentioned how to build a clean room in the previous episode, but I didn't get too into the weeds of how it works. Because the way a clean room works is that it needs air filter machine casings in all of the top blocks except for the sides. This means that for the 7x7 clean room I need 48 of these air filter machine casings, and they are not that cheap. Fortunately, I'm able to scavenge some and a little bit of plastic blocks from my previous clean room, which has now become redundant with the new one on the way. So I only end up needing to make 40. Still a pretty pricey cost. I mean, it takes 40 MV motors and a couple of stacks of steel, but nothing undoable. And I'll be honest, aside from the air filter machine casings, I did not calculate anything else I needed for the clean room. I didn't know how many plasticrete blocks I needed. I just sort of made them as I went. I made about 2 stacks of them beforehand, and if I needed more, then I would just make more. The plasticrete blocks are at least pretty cheap, so that's a good thing. All in all, the reason I want a bigger clean room is not only the fact that we're going to be using the clean room more, but also just the previous clean room was incredibly cramped and made doing any large-scale automation in it functionally impossible. So setting up a bigger clean room that I can put the circuit assembling machines in, and more of than just one, is good, obviously. If you remember that little Thaumcraft research montage in the beginning, that was for getting the EV magic energy converter. I don't end up getting it in this episode, and honestly, I might not even use it, but the EV magic energy converter was something that I heard that could be pretty useful in a clean room, because it outputs 1 amp of EV energy for free, and all it takes is, and it doesn't even produce pollution, so I can put it in the clean room, which is very good. That aside, this signaled the end of the development for the clean room, and there we go. Once I fix the maintenance issues with it, then we have ourselves a working 7x7 interior clean room, and 9x9 if you include the walls. Pretty nice, and gonna become very useful, especially when we start needing to use this thing like crazy. For now, though, it was just a relatively cheap and simple upgrade to do to your base, and something that actually looks pretty snazzy. Here you can see that the titanium loop has been running pretty well and has given us 8 stacks of titanium. So it works really well. And we end up having to head to the moon, because there's something left on the moon that I still need to do. One more quest to complete with it, so let's head back there. You see, when I was doing moon exploring for more bauxite, I ended up finding a moon dungeon, which is quite a nice find because I need to go through this thing in order to get the tier 2 rocket, or more correctly, to get the tier 2 rocket schematic. By this point in the game, monsters kind of are irrelevant, and so is damage, so this dungeon is extremely easy. But there's a bit of a nice reward at the end of it, though not from the dungeon itself. But the moon dungeon becomes nothing more than just a mob fest that I end up shooting my way through with an overpowered crossbow. It's not even that overpowered is the thing. After reaching the end, we find the boss room and we find the evolved skeleton boss, who is a little bit weird and also pretty loud for some reason. He's also not that hard to kill, so in just a matter of seconds, we take him out. And he explodes on us. Galacticraft is a pretty weird mod, isn't it? With the key obtained, we are now able to open the chest and get our well-desired moon buggy schematic. Yeah, so this dungeon had the wrong schematic. It had the moon buggy, not the tier 2 rocket. Fortunately, there is a conversion recipe between the two, so it wasn't even any different, but it was slightly concerning for a half second or so. And with that, we get to see our rewards. Now, most of the rewards here are pretty... Now, one of the rewards is pretty ass, but the other reward gets us a personal dimension, which I am very interested in the prospect of. So, well, we'll see what we do with that in due time. Back on Earth, I decided it'd be a fun idea to make a stack of the advanced processors, which is, say, the tier 2 HV circuits. I'm going to need a lot of HV circuits in the next coming sessions, so this was a necessary craft, and it's decently expensive. Here I am making the Pyrolyze oven. This is a multi-block that's fairly useful in the earlier tiers, but at EV, we get something that almost entirely invalidates this multi-block. So now I kind of just have it for fun? Yeah. And here are the 64 processor assemblies coming out of the oven, just cooked. And here I am making the distillation tower. These things are incredibly useful for a wide variety of different things, and soon enough we'll be making a lot of them. And maybe a lot might be even an understatement. Distillation towers are incredibly useful and required for just about every advanced processing line. For here, though, we're going to be using it to improve our oil production. In fact, we're going to be effectively doubling our oil production, because the cool thing that distillation towers do is that they can distill something into multiple different byproducts, which single block distilleries cannot do. So with this distillation tower, we are going to be getting sulfuric light fuel, sulfuric heavy fuel, sulfuric gas, and sulfuric naphtha. We won't have much use for the naphtha and sulfuric gas, though the sulfuric gas we will be using to make polyethylene. But the sulfuric light fuel and sulfuric heavy fuel are going to be very useful, because this effectively doubles our oil, I guess, or halves our oil consumption, because we will only have one distillery that is making both the heavy fuel and light fuel for it, rather than having two distilleries for that. If that doesn't make sense, then I guess don't worry about it. all you need to know is that we are massively increasing the amount of diesel we can make with oil. The multi-block itself isn't even that difficult to make. It takes a lot of stainless steel, though. It takes a stack of stainless steel per layer. But other than that, it's relatively trivial to make. And we're going to be needing to make a lot of these, so you better get familiar with the design. In this way, I have it set up so that it is going to take raw oil and then output the four fluids it's going to get into a super tank for each. And then the super tank of sulfuric light and sulfuric heavy fuel will go straight into the lines that unsulfurize it. If I was going for the most optimal of optimal setups, I would probably be using the oil cracker multi-blocks at some point. But just having the distillation tower here is nice enough as is. And it's going to prove to be something that we make a lot of in the future. So, more stainless steel on the agenda. I just end up voiding the naphtha and sulfuric gas as well. But there we go. Oil is improved without even doing much. As a bonus, it's much, much faster too. Now I'm on the grind for EV machine components. This is to say, it is time to make one full stack of EV electronic motors. These take titanium, neodymium, black steel, and aluminum cables. The aluminum cables are easy as normal, and black steel is fine. Titanium we already have. Neodymium is the only interesting part, because it can't take steel, and neodymium needs to be polarized. Neodymium I got as a byproduct from some mining I did on the moon, so nothing too special there, just a different processing line. And there's 64 EV electric motors. Alright, enough putzing around. It is time to play the big games. It is impossible to beat this pack without using one mod, Gregtech. It is also impossible to beat this pack without using another mod, called Applied Energistics 2. This mod allows us to turn our item storage from physical to digital, and it also gives us so many more options for how we can automate things. We can't get to the full breadth of AE2 in this episode or in the next 18 episodes probably, but we can get a start with it, finally, now that we have titanium and access to EV tier machines. I start by making some Fluix crystals and some illuminated panels. Here I am just going through kind of the quests and the motion of Applied Energistics 2, making, in this case, the pure crystals, or the seeds for the pure crystals. I also make an HV lathe, because I want a faster lathe to get rods faster. The nether quartz rods and certus quartz rods and bolts that are required for AE2 cannot be made in an extruder and must be made in a lathe, much to my chagrin. In this case, I put it on my second story of machines, which I made off camera. I also realized that I don't actually have all the inscriber presses, so I need to make a meteorite compass and then go on a bit of an adventure looking for the rest of them. I hope for that adventure to be short-lived, however the first meteor I find actually only has 3 of the presses, and therefore I need to look for another one. But I might as well get the skies done while I'm here, mostly just for another quest. And there I am, getting the inscriber silicone press that is required for AE2. There's so many itty-bitty microcrafting components to AE2, here's the pure crystals coming out, that I can't really explain everything that's going on, because it is both sort of wide-ranging and also extremely boring. I'm making here some inscriber presses that need to be made in the forming press, and then they need to be made in an assembler to get the actual logic circuits that are required for the machines. It is just kind of a mess in a microcrafting rabbit hole that I don't really want to get into because it is extremely boring. So here I am making my ME terminal. This is something that will allow us to view items if we had a system with items in it, which we currently don't. In any case, AE2 is primarily just defined by the important crafts that you end up getting. So it's not really super conducive to a very fast type of video editing. unfortunately. So all you're going to be seeing is really just the highlights of the crafting trees. Or, I guess, me making a bunch of printed circuits as well. Here I am making my first glass fiber cables, which are able to transmit AE2 channels, so they can transmit power and the channels, but I'm mainly going to be using smart cables because I can actually see the channels on that. The last thing here is I'm making 2 more engineering processors so that I can end up making 5 ME controllers. These are the big important blocks that are required for early AE2. So, yeah, these are essential. They allow me to have channels hosted off it. It allows me to turn GTEU into AE power. They are required, and I only have 5 of them now, and I probably won't make a lot more for a little bit of time because they're decently pricey, but 5 is good enough for what we're doing, at least for now. The goal for what I want my E2 system to look like at this point in time is I very simply want it to hold all of my items as of now, and maybe some extra things, some little insy bits of automation as well with it. But I'm not too worried about autocrafting because the tools of autocrafting aren't really available to us at the moment. I also almost just skipped over making the ME crafting terminal, which is like the ME terminal, but no longer can we just view our items if we had an ME system. We can now craft within that ME system. So, yay! We still need the system, but that's a later problem. Next up is the ME pattern terminal, which allows us to make patterns for autocrafting, which we're not going to do for a while, but it wants us to make this terminal, so might as well do it. We're going to find use for it eventually. And now I get to setting up the actual AE2 system. That is to say, I am powering a generator which will power the ME controllers, and thus help launch, well, the terminals, allow them to be able to view the contents of a network. It is our first official AE2 network in the entire game series, and there's nothing in it at the moment. Well, the best beginnings are the humble ones, as they say, so yeah. Let's actually put stuff in it. Here we have to make the ME chest, and then we can make the ME drive, which allows us to store cells. Item cells, specifically, is what we're looking for. Though, while looking around the AE2 quest tab, I also see the network tool, which is going to prove to be very useful, and is something that I craft because I just have the components for it on hand. It allows us to view the energy utilization of the network, quite useful. Item cells are a pain in the ass to craft. You need these item components, and then you need to turn them into the actual ME storage components, and then you need to turn those into the cells. It is a whole nightmare crafting tree that fortunately none of you people need to see except for the good parts, like getting the 4K ME storage components, and then eventually getting the 4K drives, which I'm going to put into my ME drive into the network. Now, this isn't going to become an AE2 tutorial series because God knows there's way too many of them out there, but I will let you know that the item storage components can only store 63 different types of items. So while it can store 4,000 total items, it can only store so many different types. This is a pretty important part to AE2, and it's what differentiates it from some other digital item storage mods, hint hint, refined storage, but it ends up becoming better on performance in general, so it's the preferred version. Here's our 4K ME storage cells, and the 4 of them, just like what the quest book wanted. With our storage cells, our ME drive, and our terminals, as well as the power setup, that's everything. We can make our first ME system with all the ME terminals and the drives and all the components thereof. It's a very simple one, very rudimentary one, but I mean, digital item storage is not something to scoff at, and it's not something that's even just like really useful. It is more than essential for the game. It is practically half of the game. Getting auto crafting, getting not having to use chests is really, really, really good. And it's just kind of, you know, a big achievement in the whole grand scheme of things. Of course, moving every item into the ME system is more easier said than done, because we have a lot of items and we only have so much storage. Each bit of storage is quite a few resources down the barrel in order to make. They're much more expensive and time consuming than a diamond chest is to craft. But the convenience is unparalleled. Eventually, I move enough items that I end up consuming all the slots in my current 4ME cells. So I have to make some more in order to actually, be able to hold more items in my system. But it's digital item storage, and that's good on its own right. You can see me being really happy about it, because AE2 is kind of the big break from early game to mid game. Yes, after about 200 hours, which I have spent in this world, and yes, it's been about 200 hours, I'm only now entering the mid game. But I'm serious. AE2 is kind of the defining point of mid game, because you're going from, sure, all these fancy little machines and all that stuff, but digital item storage and auto crafting is not something you had a lot of access to before. And here's a time lapse of me putting all my items actually into the ME system. You'll notice that I specifically ignore putting a lot of ingots and ores and dust into the ME system. In fact, I don't put ores into the ME system at all. And I ignore the ingots and dusts because I have a better option. We get a lot of ingots and dusts, and therefore I kind of don't want them to waste up space in the ME system. So we're going to have a different plan for them, but I'll talk about that in just a little bit. That being said, we're kind of done with storing all of our stuff away. That is all of our major items stored in the ME cell. And here I'm making some annihilation and formation cores, which are required for quite a few different ME components that we're going to be making in the future. To provide some brevity and some insurance, I decided to make another ME drive and a little bit more of the cells. I also make ME interfaces, which are required for auto crafting. So now we can finally start trying to do some auto crafting. We're not going to do a lot because auto crafting is a little bit difficult with the stuff that we have, but we're going to definitely get into it a small amount. So, well, here's our interfaces, which allow us to do that. There's a couple of Gregtech specific interfaces that we're going to be using very lightly at the moment because a lot of these components are pretty expensive for our point in the game, but we're going to still use them. And I'm sort of looking around just seeing what sort of quests I can do. But the thing is that either way, anything that we do, we're going to probably want our ingots in order to do that. So we're going to have to figure out how are we going to store ingots and dusts? How are we going to store things that we have hundreds of in an ME system? And the answer to that is a storage bus. Also, before I get too behind myself, I make myself an EV bending machine, but I don't place it down. I instead use it to make an industrial material press. We'll get to what we'll do with that later, but suffice to say, we're going to get some pretty good utility out of it. A lot of very good utility, because EV opens up a lot of multi-blocks, and one of them is the industrial material press, obviously, and it is one hell of a multi-block. Anyways, storage bus time. So what the storage bus does is it allows an AE2 network to view external storage contents. In this case, we're going to have it view a storage drawer wall, and we're going to be putting our ores and dusts in this storage drawer wall. The storage drawer wall both looks cooler, and it also provides a nice and easy place to have large quantities of resources. For example, the couple thousand iron that I have, putting it in an ME cell would be a waste of space. So instead, we can just put it in our storage drawer wall and not use any of our cells in order to store all of that. And that is how we're going to store the resources that we have in bulk. I make these storage upgrades that are very expensive, but also increase the stack limit to 1024 stacks in a single drawer. So that's pretty good and allows me to store the bulk of my items. So now I can start moving in all of my ingots and all of my dust that I have a lot of into the drawer system. After a couple of minutes of shuffling things around, that is all of those dusts cleared and the entire A in all of our items being put into the single digital storage network, which is so nice. Every ingot, every dust, every weird little component that I forgot about that I made about 100 hours ago and haven't used since, all of that is in this network. And, well, now I can see the exact number of things I have. But I don't focus too hard on that. I make an EV autoclave. So we're starting to make EV machines now, and the autoclave we're going to need for a tiny little bit of things. So the industrial material bending press takes tantalloy in order to make. Tantalloy isn't that expensive. It's mostly just a lot of tantalum, and we have a decent amount of that. But it does take a small, tiny amount of tungsten. Now, we can't get a lot of tungsten right now. We do not have good sources of tungstate. But we can get a little bit of tungstate. In this case, I got most of my tungstate through endstone processing. And this allows us to get us sodium tungstate dust. And we have to make it in an EV autoclave, hence why I made it. This sodium tungstate can then be turned into scheelite in a chemical reactor with calcium carbonate. Now, eventually, we're going to need a lot of tungsten. It is, in fact, one of the IV component materials. But for right now, we just need a small little bit of it. We do not need functionally any tungsten. We need 2 tungsten to make 25 tantalloys. So we're pretty good with what we have. Anyways, we get our small bits of scheelite from the setup. And then we can end up using this scheelite in order to make tungstic acid. However, we have to make this in an EV chemical reactor. I could have made it in an LCR, but I decided that the EV chemical reactor was just easier to make than a whole nother LCR. So we combine scheelite with hydrochloric acid in the chemical reactor and get our tungstic acid. This tungstic acid can then be smelted in an electric blast furnace to get tungsten trioxide, boiling off the water, basically. And the tungsten trioxide can then be turned into the tungsten dust in the blast furnace. All things considered, it's not a very involved process. It does end up using a lot of power if you're trying to get the tungsten ingots, though. But for what we're doing, which just takes the dust, it's totally fine and not even that big of a deal. The thing is that the tungstate is pretty hard to get. It takes a long time to centrifuge endstone, and it only has a chance of getting tungstate dust from it. So we don't have a very reliable source of tungsten at the moment, but that will be remedied eventually. We don't even need that much tungsten. We just need a tiny little bit of tungsten dust to make that tantalloy, which I am making now. Tantalloy 60 dust. To restate, why do we want Tantalloy 60? Tantalloy 60 is required for industrial material press casings, which is required for the industrial material press. Now, what exactly is the industrial material press? It is a multi-block. It is one of the first multi-blocks we get that is able to do single block recipes and nothing super special about it. We had the LCR and the distillation tower before, but this just does bending machine recipes and nothing special about it. There's no new recipes involved in it. But here's the really cool stuff. It has perfect overclock for one, so if you go up another voltage tier, it runs 4 times faster. That's pretty nice on its own. It is also 500% faster compared to a regular single block machine. And it has parallel processing. So, what does that mean? Well, obviously the 500% faster means exactly what you think it means. It runs 5 times faster than a single block machine of the same voltage tier. So this is 5 times faster than our HV bending machine on its own. The parallels mean that it processes 6 items at a time. So for each operation, it's going to be processing 6 items 5 times faster compared to the HV bending machine. So effectively 30 times faster. But not just that, it is also perfectly overclocked, meaning that it is actually running on its own 4 times faster than the HV bending machine, assuming it's an LV bending machine recipe, since it's going to be overclocked twice and it's going to be perfect, unlike the original single block machine. This means that, in effect, it's running 120 times faster than our single block machine, which is obviously very good. I kind of skipped over the whole making of the machine. Oh, it also does forming press recipes. And here we can see it making printed silicon in a full stack of printed silicon, by the way, in a matter of seconds, which would take the normal forming press a couple of minutes to do. So we have significantly sped up our processing time. And now we are hooking it up to our AE2 system. So now we can also autocraft with it. I also put an ME output bus on the machine instead of a regular output bus, which just means that it will automatically insert anything from the outputs into our ME system. And I made a pattern for it, so now we should be able to autocraft titanium plates. Yay! Isn't that a lot of fun? Here I'm gonna autocraft my first 48. Is my first autocraft. And I forgot that I don't have any crafting CPUs. So I make that. I assure you the crafting storage thing isn't anything interesting that you missed. It is just more crafting of the storage components and more micro crafting. It's a bunch of nonsense. But now we can make our first autocraft once we hook them up to the ME system, of course. And now it's time for our first actual, definitely for this time, autocraft of 48 titanium plates from the industrial material press. And it's done, by the way. It took a matter of seconds for the system to request and then craft 48 titanium plates. The industrial material press is an absolutely insane multi-block. I don't know what they were thinking, putting a 500% crafting bonus on it. That is just ridiculous. Anyways, there we go. And we can make our EV material casings and get even more ME interfaces. Here I am making a central line between my HV machines just so that I can hook up potentially any more to the ME system. In this case, the extruder, which I have set for rods. So that brings me to a bit of a disadvantage with ME, and it's that we kind of can't change circuit conditions on it. For each individual machine, we can only have one type of circuit condition and effectively one type of mold, which sort of limits its usability. Like, for example, assembling machines are a lot worse with that. But autocrafting is still very good. Okay, so aside from that, we're looking at another multi-block, in this case, the industrial maceration stack. This one just takes boatloads of titanium to craft, but other than that, it's relatively easy. Here I have to make four EV pulverizers in order to make the actual machine controller. But aside from that, it's a relatively simple craft. But the industrial maceration stack isn't nearly as good as the industrial material press. The industrial maceration stack runs 60% the speed of a regular machine, so it actually runs slower, but the parallel is pretty good, and there is still perfect overclock on it. So it's not all bad, and as a whole, it is faster than my HV machines. It is just a little sad that it's not like super crazy insane fast like the material press, but you can only win so much, and having something that is at least still slightly faster is, fine in my book. If you can't tell, I've been kind of ignoring the actual building of these multi-blocks as of late. It's just that you kind of gotta make so many of them, and they're largely similar, so building them isn't as much of a, grand feat. Anyways, the industrial maceration stack does have something useful to it, which is that unlike my ore macerators, which could only run at LV power, this thing can kind of just run whatever isn't more than HV, which is very few recipes. The overclocking is only as much as it will actually do. So for something like, ingots, I can also put them through here and they will run much faster. Whereas originally, I couldn't put them in my sort of macerator array. It would just and only work with ores. That being said, it is as simple as it looks. It is a lot of titanium that this takes, but I've been running that titanium line for the past few hours. So other than that, same as usual. And here's it is running through a bunch of charcoal in a matter of seconds. That is 6 stacks of charcoal macerated in, well, that. So pretty good. And I let it run with some bauxite, and it's been working like a charm. So it's all right. It's nothing to scoff at. It's a very good machine that will, speed my processing up. So now I'm looking at all the other EV multiblocks. There's an industrial centrifuge. There's an industrial thermal centrifuge. There's an industrial ore washing plant. There's a lot of things that will allow me to improve my ore processing setup in EV, and that's pretty good. There is one issue, in that all of them take this new tier of coil called TPV. That is titanium, platinum, vanadium. And these things are really, really good, and I love them. The thermal refinery, the centrifuge, the ore washer, they're all great, and I would want to use them so bad. But I realize that all of them, I can't really access them. Not until I get the plat line set up. So TPV is titanium, platinum, vanadium, and while we have titanium and vanadium in spades, platinum we really don't have access to at the moment. So I kind of need to set up platinum before then. Now, we're going to do the plat line later, but for right now I might as well set up some things that will help with the plat line, and those things include hooking up our fluids to AE2, because yes, we can do that as well. In this case, I'm just going to be hooking up hydrogen, nitrogen, and oxygen, which is to say the 3 main fluids I have. And for that, I have an EV assembling machine and an EV centrifuge to help me with that. I don't have the EV centrifuge for anything specific. In fact, I didn't even need to make it. I just had to make it for the industrial centrifuge, but I can't make it. But I did need the EV assembler to make lapotron crystals, which is required for fluid storage cells, which is what I'm going to need to do fluid storage in the future. However, I don't even need fluid storage components right now because I'm not going to be storing fluids in the ME system. They're just going to be on fluid storage buses on the super tanks that I already have. But it's nice to have fluid storage cells for now, at least. The fluid storage buses are as easy to make as the regular storage buses. They just take lap as plates now, and hooking it up isn't any more difficult either. You just slap it on the back of these super tanks, set a high priority to it, and then route them up with some more cable. Same as with the regular storage bus. It's just that now these are seeing fluids instead. It is a very simple process, and I might set up another one specifically for chlorine, but that will be a project for later. Setting up HNO is, well, good. And the reason I want these set up in my ME system is because routing ME cable is a lot easier and a lot more useful than routing Gregtech pipes. No offense to Gregtech pipes, because I do love them, but ME beats everything. And as we check our fluid terminal to make sure that yes, indeed, hydrogen, nitrogen, and oxygen are indeed connected to our AE2 system, that's going to be it. We have a lot of things that we can do. We're going to need to AE2ize our base because, well, we have access to it now. We can do so much with AE2 that I haven't even stepped into. I've only connected up 4 ME interfaces here. I have 1 on an assembling machine, 1 on an extruder, and 2 on the industrial material press. I've basically done nothing with AE2 compared to what we're doing in this pack. But it's going to allow us to do a lot of things. And the first thing we're going to do with it will definitely be making the plat line pretty easily. And before I properly end off this episode, I do want to say thank you to everyone who has supported this series. It does mean a lot to me, and I've had a lot of fun doing this series. Don't expect the next episode to be out soon, much like with last episode where I was really busy over the course of the month of May, so I couldn't really film or edit in time. This much the same is going to be happening with the start of June, where I am going to be busy conventioning, obviously. But that being said, I do hope to get out a video soon-ish, and I'm sure you can expect what it's going to be in the next episode. That being said, we're going to have to work on getting platinum and all the other things in EV next time.